welcome back to the Ignium Sparks podcast. Today I'm joined by Markus Heinen from Ernst & Young. Markus described himself as his purpose is about making other people successful. And actually what he does is he leads the people advisory service in EY across German, Swiss and Austrian countries for EY itself. I've been talking to Markus over the last few months about some of the aspects of purpose and holacracy and how do you create a swarm that's agile, which we'll talk about in a few minutes' time. I'm looking forward to this conversation because there's lots of things I know we're going to be having conversations about, which really help people understand what purpose is about, how it grows your business, and how you can really engage people around it. So, welcome, Markus. Thank you for joining us. I described you as your purpose as making other people successful. What does that mean for you? Because that's a really coaching specific term when I hear that. So what does making other people successful really mean?
So Phil, thank you very much, first of all, to have me in this podcast. I really enjoyed the conversation over the last couple of months. And I think my purpose is really relying to me on since I was almost born. I mean, I was always in favor of helping people. That lasts not only to my organization and my people I'm working with, it lasts to my family, to the wider society. And I always felt energy out of that. So it's sometimes people think it's a little bit selfish, but at the end of the day, it's the other way around. If I give something, I get something back at one point of time, not necessarily determining the time frame, but it's going to be in most instances or in the majority in my life, always a win-win situation over the longer time of a period of my time, of my life.
I love that. And I love that thing that resides in you, because a lot of people talking about, they talk about finding their purpose. And I have this view that your purpose is always there. It may just evolve. But actually that thing you said there is actually, it was in you from an early age. And I think you're living your purpose by doing what you do.
But I think, Phil, that's a very important point. I think that is also part of our visionary and purpose-led structure. We have to work on our purpose every day. And there are people who find it early. There are people who will find it later. And some people will never find this, probably need coaching, need help to find this, because that makes an individual and human. And that's very special. And I think this is even more important for the future of work or for everything we have ahead of us.
Yeah, and that's really interesting, that thing about making an individual in an individual. And when I look at some of the businesses that we've worked with over the time, this thing about engaging people and treating them as individuals becomes really clear. I remember when I did my MBA many years ago, we used to talk about the psychological contract between individuals. And it was about how do you build that connection one-to-one. And fast forward 20 years, I think people have taken a very different worldly view on this. One thing that also fascinates me is when you talk about Ernst & Young in the way you're talking about, you talk about building a better working world. And you, in your role as leading the people advisory services, what does that mean about, for you, building a better working world?
So I think there is a great stuff about people advisory services so tightly connected to our purpose, which we have established 8 years ago. And if you remember what our tagline before was, quality in everything we do, moving into building a better working world tagline for the entire organization, at that time probably 200,000 people, today more than 300,000 people. I must admit, it really was difficult to understand at the time when we have released it. But over the course of the time, it's extremely helped to infuse and strengthen not our employer brand, but also the power of teaming, the power of our entire organization working as a collaborative organization, although we are so big. Just to really make it very tangible, when I've taken over the people advisory services, Germany, Switzerland, Austria, 24 months almost ago, we had the difficulties that we are an inflection point. We know that parts of our business is going to be disrupted by technology or even more labor arbitrage. But then it's the question, what is left for our people we have with? And building a better working world, it does not only belong that we are helping generally our own people, but also making the working world a little bit better. In a global world, at the end of the day, it's a net situation. But what is happening to the retained organization we have in Germany, Switzerland, and Austria? And when I stepped in, I was also really referring to, and I said, okay, there's two key messages you have to take along. First, everyone needs to start on finding their individual purpose. The second thing is, and that has something to do with identity, with the DNA we are describing. So we are created a purpose for ourselves, of course, derived from building a better working world. What does it mean? But even more important, knowing that there is uncertainty for the jobs and tasks we do today in a couple of years from now, we have to start now to work together on our future of work and the tasks that people want to do. And what happens then is that some of the people don't really can catch up or don't know. This is a starting process, transformational change process. But at the same time, we are comprehensively working on a joint purpose and a joint direction. And I would like to refer to the analogy of a fish swarm.
Yeah.
A fish swarm is, and I was thinking, I'm pretty much looking always in a little bit taking analogies because it's easier for people to understand and store it in the brain. It is a fish swarm is the most agile and most dynamic organization in the world.
Okay.
And although you have small fishes, or probably you have partners with teams are separated from a fish swarm and they're swimming into a different direction, in an ocean who is getting more complex and is getting more hurricanes in a very uncertain situation, you have to put yours to fish swarm together. The difficulty is to find the right direction. But the cool thing is about being very agile, adaptive, flexible, whatever we call it. The fish swarm itself has also changing leaders and following the principle to move into one direction, and is very powerful and can defend more enemies or anyone who is not really related to our parts of the business, and that's very important for everyone individually to have a direction.
And I love that analogy of that fish swarm, because I think we all have that picture. We've all seen the fish swimming. And for listeners, you can't see me, but I'm moving my hands to show the fish swimming in the sea. The bit you mentioned about changing leaders, there's been a lot of talk about agile leadership over the last few years. And during this last 9-10 months with the pandemic, we've had to really show agility in our organizations to be able to bend and flex with the time. The thing you mentioned about changing leaders, I think, is key. How can people do this in a real world situation, to change leaders, to bring new people on? What's the things you've seen that have enabled that to happen?
I think I have not probably the ultimate answer, Phil, but honestly speaking, I experienced, we have been all learned all the different management styles, management by objectives and a little bit more delegation, but still organizations like us in that scale think in hierarchies or probably in matrix organizations. And I'm a big fan on holacracy or sociocracy 3.0, where we ultimately don't have a leader, but the team itself has a clear purpose, a clear target and objective to get resolved. And if there's frictions between different holons, they are starting then to, through a governance model, talk about the tension and resolve it. And the cool thing about it is that they probably are changing people within the holons without any issue. So, so there is no leader effectively. Of course, the individual people and how do you bring the people together makes a difference, and you have to be selective in terms of how you're setting up your holon structure. But at the same time, we have experienced so much more outcome and more agile and very fast delivered response, which I think I could never imagine before. Yeah. Does it rely to any part of the organization? If you are in a production plant, which we are not, then it's probably pretty hard. But as we are a professional service firm having mainly human capital, increasingly, of course, technology, I think there is a way that the holacracy approach is helping to do an inside-out transformation.
Yeah, that's interesting. And I love that word, inside-out transformation, because this is one of the key things. I'm a big fan of Jim Collins's book, Good to Great, which I've started rereading after 18 years. And one of the things that he talks about there is this ability for organizations to find the leader internally and have that CEO in an ego-less way step up into what he calls level 5 leadership. And level 5 leadership is actually about people take on this role in the business and not being the ego center of the business, but being the person who manages it, but isn't the guru put up on a pedestal. And I really see that as one of the key things for this agile leadership. It's not someone who the spotlight's always shining on them. It's who the organization is visible to the world. And I think one of the things that Jim Collins really talks about, he just re-released his Beyond Entrepreneurship, B 2.0 book. And in there, he talks about exactly that process. And I believe that's the key to creating this swarm that you talk about within the fish, because actually that's the way that people will really move together. What's just following on from that, I think the word purpose has been used a lot in the last few years.
Yeah, so it's very phenomenal experience, because you are actually described, and sometimes, and it's misunderstood because a lot of people don't like it when I sometimes say it, but you have to distinguish increasingly between a manager and a leader. And what do I mean by that? A manager is probably perfectly spotted on driving a business financially successful, but there is an evolving change happening, which is leading, and we have this megatrend report, which is related to equality. There's a lot of things happening in sustainability. There is health issues we have to cover. And transparency over the last 10 years, also for the younger population, for the younger talents, or almost everyone, has led to the situation that people want to work for companies who are more purpose-led, which we describe as a strategy, mission, vision, and values grounded in humanity. So you're not doing it for shareholders anymore, which we have for decades educated MBAs and executive MBAs and managers, but now we need leaders who follow a future for a company has a place in the world and has to give something back to society and also to our planet. And that is something which is rising and is expected increasingly by the workforce. And so therefore leaders are really have a North Star and looking for a wider perspective. And they start increasingly to measure not only financial impact or financial value, they take into consideration ecologic value, they take into consideration human value and social value. Is it finalized? No, but a lot of leaders I'm talking to with a couple of firms, global firms, mid-market firms, they're really seriously taking this as a strategic narrative.
I think that's a really interesting thing, isn't it? And when I asked that question about purpose, I'm glad you went down that route there, because I think this strategic narrative is the key thing. And you talked about strategy, mission, vision, and values. And you said that word grounded in humanity, because I think this is the real change that businesses are seeing. When we talked about this podcast before, we talked about business purpose and employee engagement. And I think the bit you mentioned there is key. It's about how do you ground your vision and strategy in humanity. So it's not about making money first and foremost. It's about doing something good for society. And as a result of that, the money will come. So in the 80s, a lot of businesses drove for shareholder value. And now we're looking at saying, how else do we transform the world? And we'll produce returns as well. But actually, it's about doing something good for society to start with. And I think this is the bit that I'm hearing from you there. And you mentioned about measuring not just money.
Yeah, and can we probably spend a minute on that, because it's a very, very delicate thing, because it is not the case that large corporates do not do donations or they do something for good. I mean, companies, large tech companies doing boot camps in Africa to help the society there to learn technology right from the beginning, by also supporting any digital initiative to grow more effectively seeds or managing water. Also, there's a lot of things happening, but the question is it only an hygiene component, or do you embed planned initiatives into your overall strategic planning, and which of the measures are paying into the overall purpose, and how do you bring this together? So we should increase, I mean, this is the same like sustainability. Many years ago, a lot of people started to report, and also enforced by the regulators, to report on their sustainability footprint. Today, companies really think, how can we bring sustainability back into the DNA of the corporate? I mean, COVID-19 has significantly supported CO2 emission or decarbonization impacts because people started to less travel. So we at the moment considering, and we became this year, 2020, carbon neutral within EY, although we have a lot of people flying around.
Wow.
I think the major impact is, apart from all the activities we do, really driving forward our sustainability footprint, is also the carbon emission based on the flights and the travels we do. But because of COVID-19, we got enforced to be locked down in our home offices and doing everything almost virtually overnight. And that is something which is really fascinating, what digital has an impact to our companies, but also has shown and proven how can we further accelerate in using digital initiatives to drive also our purpose-led mission.
I think that's really interesting, isn't it? In terms that EY has become carbon neutral, and it's the pandemic that's forced that, because we've been locked down at home. But actually, there was obviously an initiative in place in the first place to be able to do that, and this has almost sped it up. So it's come to fruition quicker, which is an amazing thing. I just want to touch on one thing you mentioned just now about is it a hygiene component, or how do you embed it into the strategy? Because I think this is one of the key things. I know that in 2018, 181 US businesses signed up to a pledge around their corporate governance to say that they would be looking at their business from a different angle. It wasn't the old Milton Friedman way of looking at things in terms of shareholder value. It was to say, how do we bring good to society? And so I just want to pick up on that in terms of, how do you embed this? How do you get people to believe it? Because we still have to make money at one side, because that's what drives the business and success of the future. But we've also got to do good. And sometimes there's a conflict between the two. From a people perspective, what are your thoughts on creating that energy within the business, so actually people can realize why the business exists?
Yeah, so first of all, I think very important is that a tagline should not remain a tagline. Everyone needs to understand it's a North Star, and it's a journey to get there. The second thing, you really have to start to think about KPIs, which are easy to understand, but then it's not only a component of part of your balanced scorecard, because every one of us, down to the junior consultants, have balanced scorecards. But you have to really take it serious, and in year-end or mid-year reviews, you have to talk about it. What have you done? For example, we have, for all of the partners, to really make it tangible, Phil, for all of my partners in my team, and we're talking roughly 50 partners I have in my team in GSA alone, I said, okay, in one of the dimension, we have a people experience component. I said, okay, guys, I want to have, first of all, that you are starting to be an ambassador, be a role model for educating yourself for something you haven't known before. So learning is becoming a very important thing. So we have badges, we call it badges program, which is globally available. But the question is, how do you, so it's globally available, but available does not mean that you apply it. So how do you enforce it? So I made it part of the balanced scorecard and said, okay, there's something is going to happen. There is, for example, a purpose badge. We have a bronze badge, a silver badge, a gold, and a platinum badge. You don't have to do a platinum or gold in first instance. Start with a bronze badge, do a couple of them. We have a digital badge, we have an analytics badge. So a couple of things which you normally would not do, or probably have fear to do it. But then you are starting also to bring this down to all of your people you're working with. Be a role model and apply it. And I'm going to measure this extremely hard as one of the major KPIs in mid-year and year-end if you have done it. The feedback is astonishing, because why? A lot of partners said, I couldn't believe that is so fascinating and interesting, and I really get to it. The second thing is, I really have so that touches the human value. It touches the component how we are creating more experience and getting people more engaged and bring themselves also ready for the future. The second thing is also doing something practically, giving something back to humanity. So for example, we have a 100 Ripples program, which you easily can download from the store. You can log in, and there are students from the world who have questions.
Okay.
Pretty cool exercise because you can do a 100-second recording of an answer for any of the questions you are in favor for. And I said, I would like to have a couple of these initiatives. It doesn't matter what you use. We have a lot of things available, but there's, even if you do in your social community something good for the people, I don't care. But at least I would like to have one initiative per year where you're really showing impact.
Wow. I love that. So there's a real practical element of that. So the key I'm taking away from that is within your partners, you were first of all asking them to become ambassadors to something they hadn't seen yet. So you're giving them the chance to go and do something, but they didn't know the full answers at this stage. So there's a bit of empowerment there. You're setting some KPIs around the things you expected them to be doing. You're creating the badges, the purpose badge, so they've got something they can grow towards, ranging from bronze, silver, and gold, and then platinum, if that's where they went to. And then the next bit, I loved what you said there, is role modeling it and measuring it. So you're helping them as partners role model what your expectation is as an organization, so that other junior people and other clients can see this is how these people are doing it. So there's a real train of connection between what the intention is and what's actually being done in the business.
And if you now, Phil is perfectly summarized, but if you if you now think a little bit one step further and remember what we said in the beginning on a fish swarm, this is where you can create a fish swarm of all of the people involved. So it's the partners where it starts because of our structure, but I would like to have everyone down to the bottom of the pyramid getting activated. Ideally, I cannot do it, but ideally I would not have even this hierarchies levels, which is at the end of the day just an experience level, or any promotion and progression we do shows that you made an additional next step in your career, but it's not necessarily tied to an organizational hierarchy. Because everyone has a role and we have a purpose and activities. And even if I'm participating with young people, I say, see guys, even if I'm here, the people advisory services leader, take me as an equal, take me very flat, and I want to learn something from you. And probably there is something you can learn from myself.
So this is really putting this holacracy world to reality, to say this is how it can happen. Even though you're the leader of the organization, actually, you're looking at building a flatter structure in terms of the way you act and the way you behave, so people can see you doing those things and being taken out as the role model for doing it.
Yeah, and guess what? I mean, it's very uncomfortable for a lot of partners who have been growing up in a world where they made their career paths. And for some of us, really, it was, I think for most of us, was hard to get ultimately promoted to a partner and being really an entrepreneur. And it's hard to give something away because you are so successful. And why should you change a winning structure or winning team? But I think in this uncertain world, in the world where no one can predict which company is going to survive and which are not, we are in this digital hurricane all over the place. We have to start to rethink or consider, or as we sometimes call it, challenge the conventional wisdom every day.
Yeah. And again, love that word, challenging the conventional wisdom. One of the key things, again, looking at the way you're doing there, is it's uncomfortable. And when you talk about agile leadership, I think one of the biggest issues that most leaders have is they've worked their way up through an organization and they're now in the CEO or leadership role. And there's a lot of power there. They've worked to get to that. So to then step away from leadership and allow someone else to step up actually takes a lot of nerve to do that. And as you use the word, it's hard to give away what you've worked towards. But if you're in this holacracy world where actually different leaders can take roles at different times depending on the needs of the business, that's the right thing to do. And I love that as an approach in terms of doing it. But there's a lot of vulnerability needs to be put out there. And this, you and I talked previously about the emotional intelligence side of the business that needs to come out, balancing cognitive versus emotional. I wonder how that emotional side really comes together in terms of building the need to do this and someone's ability to let go.
Yeah, so that's a very fantastic point you're touching, which I'm getting, apart from holacracy and all the modern purpose thing, which everything obviously seems to me to come together. Another very, very important theme we have to start to apply widely is the word empathy. And empathy is related to two dimensions. So the cognitive intelligence and the emotional intelligence, as you touched it already. And a lot of people starting to get much more better in this cognitive intelligence. Getting to the extreme, we have now facial recognition in the artificial intelligence where you can even predict some of behavior and some of the people's mindset of using artificial intelligence in a virtual recruiting process. That is weird. At the same time, it's a cognitive intelligence, and the AI machine doesn't have the emotional intelligence. And that only is still and will remain for many, many years or even decades for the humans, where I think we have to start to apply the emotional intelligence and bringing empathy to life. What does that mean is, has something to do with appreciation. By the way, when we talk about innovation, I mean, the world is not about digital. The combination between digital, making digital successful is about innovation. And innovation is not a method and a structure. It is also about fail often and fail early. In companies like us with a very strong regulatory environment, we have to start to learn how we can do mistakes, but learn from that. Of course, it needs to be in a borderline and all the frameworks so that nothing really severe is going to happen. But at the end of the time, if you have it in a managed, controlled environment, there is some free ups you can generate and also appreciate that some people have failed, but learning something out of it. And that is where you're starting to get engaged and more proud about what you do. And if you do it then in agile or sprints, you are learning faster, you do it within a whole on structure. So that is something I really apply by using internal initiatives, which we are driving forward the dynamics and the transformation of our own business. And I think that belongs not to us. I think it's required widely in the world, but it may be especially what I observe in the continental European market. Why? Because we have been grown up very strongly based on Greece and Aristoteles with a lot of analytical behavior. And I think we need to more stimulating the left side of our brain with creativity and giving also appreciation to other humans.
Yeah, I think this is the really key point, isn't it? This balance and the way the world is changing there. And I think if I look back on my bookshelf, I pick out Daniel Goleman's book, and I can't remember when that was written, but effectively emotional intelligence was the key piece that he talked about many years ago. And the fact that, as you say, we've developed the AI solutions to cognitively understand the facial recognition around what's going on. We've now got to make that human view to look at, okay, what's really happening? What's the emotion? What's the empathetic ways looking at things? I see a lot of businesses at the moment. One business I've been working recently with is looking at employee engagement, and they are using AI to analyze the sentiment in conversation. But of course, the AI is just reading and picking out keywords.
Machine.
Human, exactly, machine learning, exactly that. But the bit you've talked about there is how do you get the people to connect? And I think this is a big driver. And I think there's a big shift coming along. And I notice it in my children. I notice in a 15-year-old and 18-year-old how they look at the world in a slightly different way to the way we look at it, because they're seeing the world in a very different perspective in terms of gender, equality, all realms of diversity. They see people as just people. And from that perspective, they also see the differences in people, but they appreciate them. And that's the empathy side, I think, which is really brought out.
And just to make another note on a book which I recently have read, and I'm staying in contact very closely with Jamil Saki. He's a very great and talented partner and professor in the Stanford University. He has written a book, War for Kindness. By all of his research goes about empathy. And he's also starting to show the evidence that you can also measure the impact of empathy to business, people, organizations, and even more, one step further, he also has given the evidence that if you don't have empathy, there is a stigma around some of the people, or even proven by very old-fashioned psychologists, who are saying, if you have no empathy, you cannot learn it. That is not true. because probably people have resistance, but under pressure and uncertainties, there's a high resilience of people who are able to change and really to apply, but they need help to appreciate, even if they never have done it before. But this is where people grow. And by the way, if you give something and you let some other people grow by giving them compliments and making sure it's appropriately messaged, you also take energy out of it.
Yeah, that's interesting, isn't it? So it's actually by giving out, you're getting back. And it almost comes back to that weird thing you mentioned right at the beginning, which is around that if you give something, you get something back. So as a leader promoting and noticing those things, actually it comes back around again and you'll develop the organization and the individual you're working with.
Yeah. So by having said that, I think there is I mean, it's easy for startups because you can you bring a startup to life, you hire the right people, a very small team. They behave by nature agile, dynamic, and if they're good, they know also to start to grow. Most of them are able to scale? I mean, that's the reason why 250 ideas just turn into one potential good idea who's successful. But that's again the philosophy of innovation: start early and fail fast, fail early, fail often. At the same time, it's extremely hard to do it in existing business, especially when they have a specific size.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying I'm a big fan of holacracy and by nature or by sociocracy, all of this flat structure model, but there's no one company in the world who beyond Zappos is the largest one. It's a 1,700 people organization. Never seen anything beyond 10,000. So that has something to be proven because complexity also starts to obviously have some problems in holacratic organizations. So you need to have somehow a mixture between the models. And that is, I would like to refer to another approach we apply or also advise clients when I'm talking about. It's this so-called horizon model.
Okay.
So horizon model is distinguished between three horizons. You have in the horizon one, productivity and performance zone. And in horizon three, just at the other extreme, you have the innovation and incubation zone. So, and in the middle, you have the horizon two, which is called transformation zone. And there are two faculties in the world. What I observe is that the one faculty explains that there's no chance that Horizon One company is probably doing a little bit transformation, but they never will be able to disrupt themselves, or they never will achieve an incubation or get to an incubation or an innovation zone. And therefore, we have to set up a separate entity, very holacratic, and then do a operational venturing or corporate venturing to fund into that. I haven't seen success out of that. There is the second faculty who strongly believes you can change alongside of a purpose, alongside of future business models, explore and exploit business models. You can derive the future and you can start to change by taking the people on a journey through this horizon 2 transformation zone to get there. You have to do it in balance and make it transparent. So I'm a big fan of this second faculty, and I do believe there is the only chance that we can sustain some of the companies which are already have done great. Some of them will probably not make it because they stick in horizon 1. If you don't do horizon 2 and horizon 3 at the same time in an appropriate balance, say 70% horizon 1, 20% transformation zone, and 10% incubation, then you are about to fail. Yeah. But that comes alongside of people's mindset, growth mindset, ability to change, empathy, everything we talked about, Phil. And that is something what also makes leaders very strong because they have a strategic narrative, they have a purpose, and they know how you are starting to transform your enterprise.
Yeah. And I think it's really interesting. This I'm going to come back to that word transform your enterprise in a few minutes' time because I think that's quite an interesting piece. The bit you mentioned about three horizons and having this incubation zone, I think there's a tension between the individuals though, because actually those individuals who are in the productivity and the performance zone often they can't see the future. They don't understand it. They're very much in the now. They're looking at how do I improve the widget? How do I make it better? Whereas those people who are in the innovation and incubation, they're looking at reinventing the business model. And I think this is one of the key things. There's a tension again between those individuals. And the bit I take away from what you just said there is the agile leader can see all three, and they can look at it and see what needs to be done in this one, and this one in the middle. And that takes a lot of the character.
Absolutely. And honestly speaking, there is people who love, don't get me wrong, is nothing against the productivity performance zone, because that is the cash we need to do transformation and innovation zone. But it's not appreciated. Again, coming back to empathy. And there's people who really love to do productivity performance zone. And there is digital initiatives. You can do bots and AI for repetitive tasks. You can optimize always the business. You can apply, even with emerging technologies, new stuff in your existing business. So there's still room not to exploit a business model to the end, but starting to think in a life cycle and continuously do an incremental sustaining innovation. But you have to identify the people. As a leader, you have all the three horizons in place, right? But then you have to identify the people you have, and it doesn't matter where they come from, but to spot them on into the effective initiatives in the transformation zone, and being the beginner of the swarm effect. And then maybe some of a little bit more, don't get me wrong, freaky people who are doing disruptive innovations, being to the extreme, challenging the conventional wisdom of the existing business, and starting to do something totally new, which you don't even could not think about. But that's the explore business model, and it has a higher risk of failure. It has a higher risk of maturity, whereas the business business models in Horizon 1 cannot do this. They cannot just simply afford to fail. So therefore, I do strongly believe if you bring the peoples together, not necessarily take them completely out of the business, depends on the initiatives from the timing. But as we are doing it more in sprints and more shorter period of time, you can easily bring the right skills together to work on a transformation zone, which is helping the company to move into a new future.
And it's interesting. I was listening to a podcast with my good friend Don Monkhouse recently, and he interviewed Alex Osterwalder talking about business model innovation. And the bit that really resonated for me there is how you need to effectively be more of a risk taker in zone 3. You've got to put a number of bets on different products that will come out. And the key that you've triggered there for me is actually about failing fast. And it's about learning fast so you can then move on to the next one. Whereas a lot of businesses will be invest in the things that are easy and put off the things that are hard. But what we need to do is invest in the things that are hard today, because if we can overcome those, we've got more chance of succeeding. But if you then look at the number of investments you're making in different projects, you need to have that risk appetite in the same way that an equity firm would say, I'm going to invest in these businesses. As an individual business, you need to look at which is the business model we think we can put our money into in the future. But you've got to spread your risk. So I think there's an interesting thing there about how do you get the right people with the right risk appetite and the right creative mindset, which is the right brain thinking, to think about innovating product and business model at the same time, rather than upskilling the productivity side of it, which is in zone 1. So I think there's an interesting concept there in terms of the different types of people, and this risk appetite is what I'm really hearing there is key.
It's so key and so true, and that's exactly. I mean, you have been Alexander Osterwalder, I think number 4 in the global 50 thinkers in the world. I mean, and honestly speaking, it's a framework which is not rocket science. I mean, he has done it with the crowd writing many years ago. Business Model Generation was the first book. Then he learned value proposition design is something which is there's more need to understand the customer-centric value proposition. It's probably not a product you're going to sell. It's a value you're going to sell. And then he was always referring to Nespresso and so on. Yeah. But at the same time, then he started to learn also over the course of the time, there is a difference between companies. So and he's distinguishing between basic companies who cannot even describe the business model in 9 building blocks. But if you have done it, then you're becoming a master of the business models, where you are changing one building block leads ultimately to a change within one or the other building block as well. So if you're changing one of the resources, for example, by using more AI, something is happening with your value proposition, maybe something is happening with your customers, or you have more opportunities. But then, and this is the recent book I really highly recommend as well, is The Invincible Companies.
Okay.
And I like the book name because it is, I think it's really talking about, even if it is not known, the company itself, inside out, is starting to disrupt themselves between distinguishing a business model portfolio of explore business models and exploit business models. And exploit business models are pretty much Horizon 1, explore opportunity business models pretty much Horizon 3. And I'm also strongly believe, like Alex, is that we have to go through the transformation zone. And I would like to recommend another book, if you mind, called The Loop, from a company in Berlin. It's very great leaders as well, founders from The Dive. They have been writing a book about the inside out transformation. So starting really the change from the inside of the organization, which are ultimately going to apply also as a vehicle with all the methods described, the approach they have described. They use holacracy philosophy in their book. So they're taking a lot of very proven frameworks, but brought it together into doing transformation within an enterprise. And I do strongly believe that's the reason why Loop, you need to learn it and you need to accelerate, and you can then create the fish swarm, which is then activating a wider workforce. And I think that is the future for us, managing business model portfolios in exploit and explore, but you have to bring the people on that journey.
I think there's a key thing there, actually, and all of these books I'll reference in the show notes for this. I looked them all up previously, but I think there's some great things there. Before we get back into the loop, I just want to talk about that explore and exploit, because I think this is a really key thing, especially in the last 9 to 10 months with the pandemic. A lot of businesses have put their hands up and said, we have no customers anymore, we're dead. Where some businesses have gone into that different mindset and said, okay, there's a change in the world, we need to do something different. And they've gone to explore. They said, what will the world look like in the future? How do we, and the word that's been used is pivot, and it's been very overdone in the last few months. But actually they've looked at what do we need to pivot our business quick? Because actually we know that this pandemic will at some stage end. And when it ends, the world will pick up again, because it's just a cycle. And I say just a cycle because when we're in it, it doesn't feel like it. But if we look back over history, we've seen this type of thing before, and the world will turn around. And there are some businesses who will really maximize the benefits from what they're doing now, because it's fast forwarded their need to transform and pivot and explore new opportunities in that Horizon 3 world. And I think this is a key mindset shift for people. A lot of clients of mine have come to me asking that question around, how do I cope? And to me, it's mindset.
I would like to give you a very, very practical example, which also shows what can happen to people. So, and it's related a little bit to two parties. I'm living in a very small community here in Germany.
Okay.
And of course, we have supermarkets here, but we have also, how is it called, an ice cream parlor? Is that understood?
Yeah, so ice cream parlor, yeah.
So you can get there and have phenomenal Italian ice cream. So we have climate change, it's getting warmer, so we generally have more often ice cream. But they are heavily depending on visitors, right? Like the premium restaurants, that would be the other examples. So what happened now in COVID, before a heavy lockdown, but they locked down the luxury food stuff. So restaurants got locked down, ice cream parlors got locked down. So, and I met them by occasion in a supermarket, and he was really blaming on the owner of the ice cream parlor, and he was blaming on the situation, and he cannot get the money from, it's difficult in Germany, from the government supporting. So they said, stop, before you are getting into a protected mindset, start to think about your growth mindset and what is now the opportunity. And I said, see, the supermarket is open. Have you ever thought about to package your phenomenal ice cream, because there is a regional market section within the large scale supermarket where you can probably put your stuff into the fridge. People are probably going to buy that. You have to follow the hygiene issues and so on, but that is something you need to manage. But at least I would request you to start to think about if there is some workarounds where you have to order some packages and bring your ice cream into different flavors, and then you put it into the supermarket and you give them a little bit margin, but you can still get at least a lot of ice cream sold. Guess what? A couple of weeks later, he said, Markus, that was one of your most brilliant idea, because first of all, I have more demand as I had before, because the premium ice cream we are doing is much more better than the traditional ones which you can get from the global consumer products companies. It gives a contribution to the regional community, because people like to sustain and helping them, giving something back to the humanity. So people generally are social oriented. But then it was also, he said, it was extremely difficult to find someone who is producing boxes for me and my ice cream, because they wanted to have me 10,000 boxes to be bought. Because it's volume producers in Germany who said, okay, you can get 10,000 or zero. So then he found a small startup in Denmark who was able to ship him 100 or 1,000 just to make a very agile sprint.
Wow.
And he has delivered and got in contact with them. They've been very dynamic, very agile. They made a partnership, and they delivered in 2 weeks a complete set, not only 100 of these ice cream boxes, but also personally, totally phenomenally colored, have given also a little bit of marketing effort. It has grown into a phenomenal business model innovation.
Wow.
And I would even say, I would question if you still need ice cream parlors in the future. Because you can probably think you can further work on the business model. Why you are not using delivery services, which are doing also some of the other thing for the restaurant. That is the second example. They said, we cannot deliver food. I said, why are you not starting to use Delivery Hero or someone else with global companies who are doing this for forever? Yeah, but we have a high brand. We have a restaurant environment. I said, I mean, if you sell zero, you are dead. But then try to segment your products in a way which is easy to consume and still remain your high-end products for later if you want to continue with the restaurant, stationary restaurant. But then at least you have a baseline where you can still keep your people and you get a fundamental product delivery. So you're absolutely right. The way the people have to think is getting out of the comfort zone and is driving new business models in a totally different way.
Yeah, I think this is, I love that story, and I love the ice cream parlor story. In England, we haven't much need for ice cream sales at the moment, but you're right. People still love ice cream. And at the end of the day, there is a way to get your product to market. It's about thinking differently. And I love that thing about, the growth mindset versus the fixed mindset. If we flip into the growth mindset aspect, we know we can find a way of doing it. And some people have that creative spark. They'll come up with it. And that's the key. It's tapping into that. My belief is everyone's creative. They just haven't been able to use it more recently. But I love that story about, finding the packaging company, finding someone who's agile enough to produce a small number of packages with the colorful branding on it, ship it from Denmark to Germany, put it in the supermarket in time. I think that's such a lovely story. And I think there's a book to be written at the end of pandemic, which is all of these changing stories of businesses across Europe, across the world, who have shifted, who have changed and done things differently. There's an amazing story here. And I think there's a mindset thing that people really need to look back on. It's that spirit of creativity in the explore world, not just the exploit world.
Yeah, and you're absolutely right. I think, and that is something which I find fascinating. We can talk about the pandemic and why we haven't seen that earlier and so on. I mean, it was foreseeable many, many years back. Even now they blame on people like Bill Gates and so on, that he has known and probably has done it, all these conspiracy theories. But at the end of the day, what it has done to us was an acceleration of digital experience and the ability. I mean, think about people being in the office, enforcing people every day come into the office because they want to have control about the people, what they do every day. Overnight, they have to work from home. So how do you continue to control, if you want to do control, to do this? And that is that. I think majority of these people who have that mindset, who want to continue with that leader management style, got told time is over and we have to give more responsibility and accountability back to the people.
Yeah, I think this is it. I think there's a really fascinating piece in there. It's about people's changing mindset, and even coming back to the EY proposition of building a better working world. We've been forced to work from home. We've found ways of doing it. Even you and I having this conversation now via Zoom. Zoom has trebled the way we do it. We use Microsoft Teams. We use Google Meet. We actually we have ability to do it. I was on a video call this morning. I cycled up a mountain in Switzerland this morning.
Mhm.
I use a cycling AR app called Ruvi. So I connect it to my turbo trainer and I chose a route. It was 11 kilometers up a Swiss mountain, and it was a beautiful sunny day. Technology enables that. I could feel the gradient. I could see the pictures. I could ride it. I could sit at my home and do it. And I think this is the fascinating thing: is we don't need to be in the office to have that experience. But I think we do need the people experience. We still need that interaction at some level.
Yeah, it's so true, and I really like what you're saying. Also, this example on applying and making, as we say sometimes, from doing digital, being digital. So we are getting this convergence between human and technology is getting to. I mean, it's probably no one anymore in the world who has not a smartphone or a tablet or maybe two or whatever. So it's much more easier to access technology and having the bandwidth. But there's also something which is also related to it, which I also have to understand a little bit better, is what also does this with our mental health. And that's another reason why companies like Peloton or companies like Calm or companies like Headspace have exploded. All this theory around mind clarity and stuff, I think is also needs to be more embedded.
Yeah.
Because we need as humans this balance, and just working back to back the entire day, locked into your office, not even walking, not getting outside, getting a little bit fresh air, talking to other people on something which is totally unimportant.
Yeah.
That makes humans, and that is something which I think we have to keep or have to find ways to activate this, because then people need to stay in this positive mindset, because that is related to empathy, that is related to growth mindset, and that makes companies and also people even more successful in the future.
I totally agree with that, and it's come back full circle again to that word empathy. Marcus, I've really enjoyed this conversation. I could talk to you for ages about this. Before we finish, I've got one question. I think, and we've talked about lots of different things, ranging from holacracy to empathy to three horizons. We've talked about the growth versus fixed mindset. You've given me some great examples of books which I reference to. If you were to give one thing, you would say this is the key thing that people need to be aware of at this time. What would that one thing be that would make the transformation into building the agile swarm that we've talked about? What's the one tip if you had to distill it down to one thing?
I think the one tip I would like to give: don't wait, start now. And start by understanding yourself and start to learn to make yourself familiar. The future is great, and it belongs to yourself to grow and start on a journey for lifelong learning.
Love that. A journey to lifelong learning. What we could do with that? Markus, thank you. Markus Heinen, it's been a pleasure to talk to you. I will reference all the books you've talked about there. I'm sure there's lots more we can talk about, so maybe one day we pick up another conversation to move this forward again, but I really appreciate your time. Thank you. And I look forward to having this conversation again. Thank you.
Thank you, Phil, for having me and really having this very bilateral conversation. I also appreciated this, and I'm sure we got connected through an occasion, and that is building relationships forever, even we are in different geographies. I think the mindset is the same. Let's move forward and create a movement. You can count on me, and I'm sure I can count on you.
Yeah, thank you. If people wanted to reach out to the work that you're doing at EY, how would they find out about what you're doing and the work around building this better working world?
So the easiest way would be just getting in contact with me in LinkedIn. You will find me, Markus Heinen, People Advisory Services Leader, or my email. It's markus.heinen@de.ey.com. So it should be easy to be fine. Send me an email and I make sure that we are responding, and I'm personally also taking care about it as it is related to my personal purpose, making other people successful.
Love it. What a great place to stop. Thank you, Markus.
Thank you.
Markus, that was brilliant. Thank you. Really, lots of great things there. Fascinating conversation in terms of some of the things, and I never know where these conversations are going to go when we start. So we meandered lots of places, and I love the ice cream parlor story. I think it's just a brilliant story about what's going on in the world, and yeah, just fascinating. I didn't mention it. You mentioned about transforming the enterprise.
Yeah.
And I did. It wasn't appropriate to say it on the recording, but when I was at Rolls-Royce in 1996, Rolls-Royce was going through a tough time. The share price had dropped. Our Rolls-Royce engines were late to Boeing. We were late making deliveries. We were battling against Pratt & Whitney and GE. So Rolls-Royce sold the IT department to EDS. And as a part of that, EDS owned A.T. Kearney at the time.
I know.
And I was a 25-year-old graduate. I'd done a mechanical engineering degree, and it came out that we were going to start working with these consultants, and there was an opportunity to apply to be on the consulting team. And this was my first experience of consulting. So I wrote this note to the leader of the consulting team and said, I'd love to come and work with you in Rolls-Royce. And I got the job working within Rolls-Royce on a program called Transforming the Enterprise.
Here you go.
And I was 25 at the time, and I learned my consulting skills then. But it was all about how do we make the engine go faster? How do we exploit, not explore? And I think 30 years later, we have this word explore, but we weren't exploring them, we were exploiting. And it was just about it was about making the business better, productive.
Yeah, and it was needed at the time because you ran into a distressed situation. I mean, if you wouldn't have been doing it, you can do a lot of exploration, but at the end of the day, unless you are then selling off some business, take the money and reinvesting, you have to first fix, and that's the valley of pain we have to go through. Sometimes very, very painful to have to go through, but you have to be also transparent. This is what I told everyone. It is not gonna be easy, and we will go through the valley of pain. The only thing what I'm gonna change is I make sure that it's not too deep, and it doesn't last too long.
Yeah. Because that's going to kill the business.
You have to shorten the valley of pain, and not shorten. You have to make sure that it's not deep, and you have to shorten it as best as we can so that you are beyond the zero line.
Yeah, fascinating. That's a really great story. I love that. It's Markus, thank you. I'll get this fixed up with my sound man. He'll take a couple of weeks to do it. I've got 2 episodes to go out in front, so it's going to go out towards the back end of February, I think is the time we've got scheduled for it. But what it is, I'll drop you a note. I'll send you the recording of it so you can see it there. I'll reference the books, but I've really enjoyed it. It's been a pleasure talking to you. Thank you.
Yeah, it's Phil. It was I meant it. Really, it's a pleasure to meeting you and having this great conversation. There's a lot of mindset similarities.
Yeah.
And I think when we are not starting it, who should do it? I mean, and I know there's a lot of other people. That's the reason why I like this 100 Leaders community or other stuffs where you are getting embraced. A lot of talented people in the world who really are there for doing something better. But you cannot identify and you cannot bring them together. We are too less in this fractured world, and that's the reason why we have to think a little bit differently. And that's still the reason why I'm with EY, because I think this giant company with a huge footprint all over the world has to make an impact somehow. And my legacy, and I am always coming back to the stewardship model. It is leaving something behind in a better shape as I've taken it over.
Yeah, I love that. Love that.
And that is something even in hard times and high winds and hurricane situation, you have to maneuver as a leader the ship through this uncertain time.
And actually, that analogy of the fish comes to mind there, because actually within EY, you're a bigger fish in the pond. And that's, you can make change by doing that type of thing. As an individual out there, it's much harder. But if you've got that bigger organization, you're part of something and you can create that movement. I come back to, I might have mentioned you before, Tim Lebrecht, who runs a business called The Business Romantic. He's a German gentleman, actually. But I was looking at my bookshelf to find his book. But his view is he wants to transform the way we work. And he's doing it by creating this movement called the Business Romantic Society. And it's fascinating, the things he's doing. It's looking at how do we engineer from the inside out.
Yeah, cool. So you see, there's a lot of similarities. I mean, there's probably not the one and only solution. I think that's another reason why the leaders have to apply their model and their mindset. And starting somewhere, there is also not one blueprint you can repetitively do. It's very important that companies find their own path. They need to determine, what do we do in the horizons? What is the management of my business models? How my organization structures are? What type of talents and capability? I mean, again, that is really where the transformation starts. You have to think end to end.
Yeah, that's very true. Markus, thank you. I know you've got busy time.
Thank you. I need to run.
Yeah, thank you.
Get a little bit prepped. And Phil, thank you very much and talking to you sooner or later.
I will see you soon. Yes. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Goodbye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.